Hi, hello everybody, and welcome to another interview here at Foothills Art Center. My name is Eric Hockley. I am the curator, and I'm here today with Jeremy Janus, a photographer, and we're going to be talking about his work. And we met from him being in the member show this year for the first time, and yeah, he's been already really active in our community. So, Jeremy, if you don't mind introducing yourself and who it is you are and what it is you do.
Yeah, so my name is Jeremy Janus. I'm a nature photographer. I live in Denver, Colorado. Pretty much just travel over pretty much the Western US to take the photos. We recently went to New Zealand, so do some stuff globally as well, but try to focus kind of on that Mountain West region as far as everything that I'm shooting.
Awesome, awesome. How did you get into photography originally?
So I kind of have a long, convoluted story with it, but when I was in my adolescence, I went through a lot of depression and anxiety, and that kind of took me into the woods to use as therapy.
Hmm.
And at the same time, I was also doing a lot of painting and drawing. I did my first full wall mural when I was 20 years old. So that turned into, donating pictures to children's hospitals over the years. And when I turned 30 years old, I moved back to Colorado. And my friend from my childhood, Mike, he told me, he saw some of my pictures just off my camera phone and stuff I was posting to Instagram, and said, it would be awesome if I picked up a camera and just saw where it went. And he really pushed me into that. So I bought a camera in 2016, and I've been shooting ever since. So it's just been pretty much escalating every single year, just taking more photos, going to new places, and just continually pushing how far I can go with photography.
So you have a background in painting?
Yeah, painting and drawing, but all that was also self-taught. I never took any art classes when I was younger either. So
You never, and to this day, you still haven't taken any art classes, or have you gone into anything in terms of to learn how to do photography, or you just all through practice?
no, ironically, this last weekend was the first time I ever took a photography class with Keith Ledzinski. Mike's camera had a landscape class with him,
Did
and
you
I
do
took
that online?
yeah,
Oh,
I
that's
took it
cool.
online, and it was really cool. It was it's funny, as a photographer, you kind of get this idea like, oh, I'm going to take this class and I'm going to use this one technique, and it's going to take me to this next level. But it was funny, and listening to Keith Ledzinski is he's so cerebral and so methodical in the way he takes photos, and it
Hmm.
actually reminded me a lot of the way that I approach it. But it's you just kind of get these little tidbits of the way they approach their shooting philosophy, and you kind of can pull that back and bring it into your own.
That's cool. I wonder if there's an analogy to be made with photography. Photography is to art as like baking is to cooking.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think they're very complementary.
There's
Um,
like a scientific and precision aspect involved in photography.
yeah, and I would also agree. I would also say too with the art analogy that it's very much tied to white space and being able to kind of like zone out, like
Hmm.
just when you're shooting. And actually, all my photos, they're very vibrant and saturated from my days of painting and drawing.
Oh
I
yeah.
love color, so it translates well.
Yeah, there is definitely a painterly quality to your work. On that note, like let's just go ahead and people don't have to look at our faces the whole time. Let's pull up some of your work here. Tell me a little bit about this one. I'm always so fascinated ever since we did the Ansel Adams show, and obviously we were just talking about saturated colors, and he's not doing that. He was a black and white photographer, but also he had a mastery of tonal variation that was unmatched.
Yep.
And when you see them in real life, it's truly incredible. But one of the things I really enjoyed about having that show was getting to hear the stories behind taking the photo. I think just the very nature of photography and especially wildlife or wild nature photography is you get some pretty cool stories behind what it took to get that shot or where you were, why you were there. And so maybe that's a place to start with looking at this one specifically.
Yeah, so this one is kind of funny. We were hiking up in Estes Park because I had to take a photo for an article that was getting written on me with photography, and we were actually with my friend that introduced me for that article and my girlfriend. So we were out hiking, and we'd just taken the shot, and we were going through the woods just as the sun was setting, and right in the middle, you can see that squiggly cloud. And
Yeah.
that was, honestly, it was
Fundamental.
crazy because every single mountain and peak we were on, that thing just like caught my eye constantly. So as we were going through the forest, it's like, it'd be awesome if there was one place that opened up and you could actually take this shot with all the colors going. And as a photographer, sometimes you have that internal fight with, do I drop a tripod and do I add the ND filter to really get, the smoothness, and then some of the better.
Hold on. What was it? What's the filter mean?
So
Just
ND
explain
filter,
for my sake.
Yeah, so ND filter is basically it's a filter where you can darken up the photo, so it's allowing you to take longer exposures.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you're also getting some of that saturation, and then also with the highlights, where the highlights are at, or you're when you're taking those longer exposures, you're not blowing out the photo. So a lot of the times when I'm shooting for the highlights, and then because obviously with Lightroom, it's very easy to pull shadows out now, and it makes it a lot easier to kind of even out that balance in your photo. But if you blow out those highlights, your exposure and clouds are blown out, and then you really don't have a good photo there. So,
gotcha. So you have to manage certain things have to be managed on the front end,
yeah,
and
exactly.
other things can more easily be addressed.
Yep.
In post.
And that's kind of the way I look at it too. Is like when I'm shooting, I want that picture to be as perfect as possible, so that you can expand it in Lightroom if you want to. But really, if you're just adding colors and some saturation, you're just, you're not doing too much to the actual photo. I try not to rely on Photoshop. I honestly rarely use it either. So I try to stick just to Lightroom.
Yeah, that reminds me of this. I was watching a video on YouTube the other day that was all about, man, what movie was it? It was a director. He was putting together. Oh, it was for the new Blade Runner, and they were talking about how much practical stuff they tried to do, and how they never wanted to utilize CGI from whole cloth. They always wanted to try and get as much in camera as possible to work with before going into any kind of post-production work. So it's a similar theory that like the more you can get and the closer you can get to perfect through the camera, the better, because getting wrapped up in trying to fix everything after the fact, it's going to make it a mess.
Yeah, and I think it can kind of create some laziness on your part too, right? If you know you can fix certain things later on, are you going to take that proper time to set it up, make sure the exposure's right, make sure everything is, pretty much as good as possible before you go to that point?
Yeah. Are there any telltale signs in a photograph that's been overworked in post?
Yeah, you can start to tell, especially when you can see it toward the end of the mountains, like when you start pulling clarity, which I pull clarity like a lot. I love clarity.
On the left side here, the end of the mountains?
Yeah, kind of left side, and then just like when you zoom in over the middle of that ridge, you can start to see where there becomes a little bit more white clipping. Just it's very faint in this photo, so the better the camera you have, the better it is at minimizing that. But you can start, when you start pressing photos to the maximum they can go, you'll start seeing a lot more of that white opaqueness come around mountains and the kind of the lighter areas. So you can tell on that end, but there's other ways you can kind of edit and pull, like whether that's putting, now Lightroom added a texture option, so it can kind of help out alleviate some of the issues you get with clarity. So it's just kind of it's a very visual thing too. There's some photos I'll edit in a different way just to make sure it's like, okay, this doesn't look overdone. You want it to, from a composition standpoint, that's the way I'm always editing too, is I want to evoke emotion, but I also don't want it to look like fake, because it is it's a real place, it's a real time, and you're trying to get that through in your photos too.
Right. You could easily just say like, oh, I love saturated photos. I'm going to blow the hell out of all of this, and I'm going to make it hyper saturated, and you're going to end up with these like fantastical looking scenes.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't have been real. And I think there's something that folks really value in looking at photography that is genuine, because it's almost like, what's the point of taking a photo if it's not, if it never actually happened.
Yep.
That's some of the magic, right? Is that we look at this and say, God, that exists, especially nature, right? That existed real in nature at one point. And I just wasn't lucky enough to be there, but like, thank God for the photographer, because he was able to bring this image to me. And if it's something that you took too much liberty with, then I think you're losing something. So I totally agree with your opinion on that.
And there's a very fine line, right? I mean, the funny thing is that's actually what I started in drawing and painting with, was superheroes. So I have this very fine line I try to create between fantasy and reality, but there's obviously that line that gets crossed. And once you get into that fantasy side, it's like, is that too much, you know?
Yeah. I think there's something that you put trust in a photographer in that way, where if you were illustrator or painter, or that was your primary discipline, then we wouldn't be asking that of you in the same way as an audience. I've never thought too much about that, but I think there's something really interesting there about the photographer. You're almost like a journalist of the art world. Like we trust that what you're bringing us actually happened.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you have to be completely upfront that this is so digitally rendered or overdone that it's not meant to represent reality. In which case, I would hope that maybe you wouldn't be doing something in nature if that was going to be your path, because you're just kind of eschewing the best parts of it.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that's why I try to stick to Lightroom. You know, I mean, the whole game of photography is just lights and shadows. So Lightroom is awesome because you're basically amplifying colors that are there. You know, you can have some manipulation in there, but for the most part, it is true to what that scene was. And you're just either amplifying or pulling out the lights and shadows and colors. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, that's really cool. Let's go on to the next piece here. So tell me about this one.
So this one is one of my favorite photos I've ever taken, actually. I took this in the first part of 2019. So you and I have talked about it before, but I had a gallery, and we'll touch on it later based on the conversation, but I had a gallery that was going up in the Denver International Airport. And when and that was coming up. And when I first committed to it, I actually didn't have a great winter portfolio, but I knew I was going to have time and I could start snowshoeing. And so this was one of my first snowshoes. And this is up in Rocky Mountain National Park. It's Lockville. So when I came up over the ridge in the morning, it was a sunrise, and the clouds and the fog and the ice were just absolutely insane. The ice down below, you could kind of see where it was sheening. So I was taking a bunch of shots where I was like getting a lot of that ice foreground. And when I looked up, I just saw the way the lights were starting to hit the rocks, and kind of the way the lights and shadows were interplaying in the background was absolutely alluring to me. So I believe this was a 31 millimeter focus. I actually zoomed in a little bit, but I just wanted to capture kind of that. I think a hard thing as a nature photographer to capture and share with people is the magnitude of the scale of it. You know, I mean, I think that's what allures me to nature photography in the first place, is you go to these magical places that are just monstrous.
Sorry.
Oh, you're good, man. Just they're monstrous and so much bigger than life in a lot of ways. And I felt this was the first picture I really took where you're actually getting that magnitude of scale and you're kind of seeing it for what it is at face value. So this picture still, it gives me the chills when I see it, just because it was exactly what it was that morning. And you can kind of see where those shadows cut across that forest line down below. And it really illustrates that interplay between lights and shadows in nature photography, which is probably my most enjoyable part of it.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about tonal variation, you really got it going here, right? You've got everything from the brightest possible whites to deep dark blacks down here in the trees and this great shadow line. There's a lot of great little bits of darkness here too amongst the cutouts in the rock that give the rock this great texture that makes it really evident. And man, yeah, it's totally it's a beautiful shot for sure.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and a lot of people have told me this is their favorite shot I've ever taken as well. So
Yeah, there's something really spectacular about it. Do you have a preference in terms of time of year to go shoot? You said you didn't have too much for a winter portfolio. Have you got, now that you've taken this one, have you started to take more pictures in the winter?
yeah, definitely. Honestly, I love winter just because when you get back there, I mean, this was actually I was heading up to Sky Pond that day, and I actually got chased off of the mountain because a whiteout came through so quick. Uh,
Oh,
and so it's and actually I went back the next week and did it because I will not get pushed off a mountain. But it's I know it's such a like
the
hard headed man.
certain amount of pigheadedness is required for nature photography. You cannot not be scared away by inclement
Oh,
weather.
dude, 100%, man. And yeah, so it's just kind of cool because it really like, it's just such an extension of your soul when you do these hikes. But my favorite time probably is winter just because me and my girlfriend get out and we hike Rocky all the time. I actually met her up on a winter lake in Rocky Mountain at Black's Lake. We were on a 10-mile solo snowshoe both ourselves. So it was just kind of like,
Oh, that's cute.
yeah, it
That.
was really cool, man. So just since then, it's just been, I try to always envelop myself in that winter aspect. And there's really no people around, so I think that aspect of it too. It's just such an untouched, unkempt wilderness that honestly, when you're 10 miles in and there's no one around, I don't think there's a better feeling in the world, man.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Let's go to the last one here. Every time I do one of these, we're like always running up against the clock.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm gonna pull up the last photo you sent me. Resume share. Can you see that one? We
Yep.
got this wave breaking here or wave crashing.
Yes. So this was in New Zealand. So we were there in February, and we camped out the night before, kind of near. This is like the lowest part on the South Island in New Zealand, and there's up right above that wave, you can actually see where there's that lighthouse. And so the cool thing here was I was actually taking long exposures. I didn't really want to focus on any of the waves really crashing. I wanted kind of that silkiness going across the rocks. And all the pictures I was taking they were cool, but they were very flat. Like there
Mm-hmm.
wasn't really any liveliness to them. And so I was like, like just started thinking in my head was like, I really want to just slow this wave down and kind of like capture what that moment looks like. And so I kind of shifted my gears and moved over this way. And I got a few shots where that wave was exploding. And actually, ironically, this also changed my editing style. I don't normally edit uh, quite this dark, but I really wanted to pull out where those highlights of the wave crashing and the shadows of the wave were,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what I do love about like even the ocean and wave shots is you get these crazy different colors in between. You get some of those aqua blues and some of those lighter blues that start pulling out, and it pulls your eyes in different ways. And in this picture, I can sit there for an hour and stare at this thing just because it pulls your eyes in so many directions. And ironically, all the rocks here reminded me a lot of kind of that Lord of the Rings feel and vibe too. So it kind of gave it very much a New Zealand character to it, which I really cared for as well.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of a really painterly quality in this one, especially in the. Can you tell me what's going on in camera that's giving this effect out here like this? Like if you zoom in tight enough,
Yeah,
right here, like you've got I mean, this is a result of the motion, right, of the water,
yeah,
these like streaking going on here. But look how much of this just looks painted.
yeah.
There's blocks of color in here, and just some of it just what is it that does that gives it that look?
That's some of the, I mean, some of the saturation that I do will pull out some different, like around the lighthouse, you can see that kind of like blue ring that
Oh
comes
yeah.
from. put in a little more blue in there, things
Uh-huh.
like that. But where those waves start to crash, that's where some of that clarity really comes into play. Where if you made it very luminescent, it would basically be a soft kind of wave extending. Whereas like this, where I'm putting a lot of that clarity in, you actually start to see kind of those individual blades of water shooting up. And I that's kind of why I love this one, was being able to play with that dark and light character and actually make it a little bit more dramatic. I really feel like it pulls your eye in, and it makes you kind of feel immersed in it, which for a wave is pretty much the best thing you can ask for.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at how this cross hatching that occurs. Like, look down here, you're talking about the aqua blue. This is a pretty special thing here. What we got this like interesting halo effect on the rock too.
Yep, and that's where some of that clarity, it'll start pulling across those edges.
Okay.
That's where, like, a good example of that is like chromatic aberration, where you'll get some of those different colors going across the edge as well.
Mm-hmm.
Lightroom, now you can take it out. It used to be something that was a little bit harder to do, but
What's chromatic aberration? I feel like it's something I've seen in video game settings, and I just don't know what it is.
yeah. So it's just basically where the outside edges will start to pull different colors. So you'll have, like either a blue or a green line that goes right across the line, that edge of the line. I'm sure there's technical gurus that'll give you a better explanation than that, but to me, it's just always kind of a little bit of line that goes and outlines those edges around the corners.
Interesting. Yeah, I just give people watching something that they can go look for if they're looking at digital photography.
Yeah, and you'll see it too. I mean, the thing that I love about Instagram, as I try to base myself in the technical aspect as much as possible, but you'll see dust spots, chromatic aberration, blown out highlights. So it actually does make you a better photographer, even trying to spot those things.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. Like things that just having a couple of those pieces of understanding in your toolbox can make the process of viewing art or the practice of viewing art a lot more interesting, a lot more fun when you feel like you have just a little bit of insight into what's happening. And even if it's something like an error, you're playing this game where you're trying to catch what, oh, they see that they must have struggled with that a little bit there. But man, now that we've zoomed out, it's that white halo on this piece of rock that really cuts it away. And you said that's the clarity.
Yeah, that's where you'll start to pull a lot of that clarity, and that's why you get some of that white around those edges, even on that top left corner. But to me, you have to outweigh kind of. There's some small things that you can look at as flaws or defects too, but to me, it's like what is your overall vision of that photo? What are you trying to portray? And to me, like, pulling clarity in this instance is the perfect example of, like, you are giving that emotion, you are feeling like that raw energy of that wave crashing and exploding, and kind of like that sense of being there. I don't know, I love giving people that feeling.
Yeah. I think learning to work within and with the difficulties or the things that might be, in some instances less desirable, and in some other instances you're like, oh, that's exactly what I wanted. I think that's like a perfect place for us to stop. I think that's a great takeaway, and I think anybody who's creating their own art can empathize with the feeling of having to make difficulties or errors even work with what they want or bend them to their will. And that's a big process in the art. So thank you, Jeremy, for all your time. I really appreciate it. I learned a lot today. I learned a lot.